Okay, here is part 3. So what we're going to do this afternoon is, this is the rear track bar out of the wagon, and we're going to reuse the metal piece. So we got to press these bushings out, and I've got a bushing kit, which is, these are poly bushings, replace these rubber ones. I usually do not like using poly bushings because they're very stiff compared to the rubber, but for a track bar, that's totally going to be fine, and actually probably preferable to have less flex in this than what a rubber bushing would have. And so to press these out, I'm going to use my big vise, because I don't have a press, so we're going to like rig up some sockets and, you know, clamp it together with this guy, hopefully not break it, and then and clean this guy up. So hopefully when I come back, we're going to have this all cleaned up and the bushings pressed out, and then we'll do the install of these guys. Okay, so I got just the rubber portions out. As you can tell, the metal sleeve is still in there. So this is the actual track bar, and that's the sleeve, metal sleeve that would go around this rubber bushing. And so this is the new poly one, and it doesn't fit. So you gotta take that metal piece out. So when what I used to press it was, this is the receiver, so this would go right over this guy, right? And then I pushed it from the other end using the socket, the back end of this socket, because it was about the right diameter. It was just slightly smaller than that bushing, and I was able to push it out. So to get this metal sleeve out, there's a couple different ways I've done it. I've used a hacksaw and cut the bushing like this way. So basically put the blade in, mount the hacksaw, and then, you know, cut it. And then when you cut it, it makes the ring smaller, because now there's a gap for it to kind of shrink into. I've hit them with a chisel, like chiseled it out. That usually ends up marring the surface. The hacksaw can end up marring too if you cut too deep. I'm going to try punching it from this side with a chisel and see if I can get it to budge. Get back. Okay, so how I got them out is I used a sawzall to put that cut there. See that cut? And you have to be really surgical with the sawzall to do this. So metal blade on the sawzall, and basically have it in the vise like this. You can actually see where I kind of nicked the metal there. That should be fine though. It's not like these bushings are going to be under a lot of flexing strain, but yeah, that's going to be fine. It barely nicked the surface there. So you cut it with the sawzall, which allows the bushing to kind of like shrink a bit. Basically, you take, you know, after you make the cut, you just tap on the side a bit with a chisel and the hammer to kind of squeeze it together. Like, right, you go and then hit it on this side, which squeezes this whole thing together. And then from the other side, you hit it with a chisel on this edge, and it'll just go pop right out. So no matter how rusty they are, usually that's a good way to get them out. And these aren't too bad. See, I'll see. See, this side I didn't even nick, and this one I got just a little bit too aggressive with the sawzall. That'd be fine though. So let's press these things in, these new bushings. Focus, you fuck. Okay, they're all pressed in. These are really easy to go in. Polyurethane bushings, they kind of, you usually can get one side in by just like pressing it by hand, and then the other side I just kind of squeeze in the vise like a press. What's interesting is this kit, these bushing kits usually come with, these are the bushing kit. This is for the front track bar. Usually they come with grease to grease the polyurethane. This didn't, so I just used some chassis grease from that red tube, which is just a sticky green grease that just is really good for off-road vehicles. Especially since these don't have a grease fitting. That's one thing I should look into, is is it going to be worth adding a grease fitting to this track bar on both ends? Because that's one thing I've noticed on my Jeep is I've got an aftermarket rear track bar that does not have a grease fitting, and it's got a poly end. One end's like a Heim joint with a grease fitting, and the other one's got just a poly joint with no grease fitting, and that poly joint squeaks like every single time after a rain, and it washes the grease out. Well, it takes a couple of rains, but yeah, it'll wash that grease out. And I wonder if adding a grease zerk to this is going to be worthwhile. I have to think about that. Might have to revisit this track bar in the future. So catch on next time, guys, and I think tomorrow we're going to install this or put zerk fittings on if we're going to do grease fittings. If we can put grease fittings, we're going to put the grease fittings on tomorrow because I want to do some research on that subject. And then put this guy on and start putting the springs on. The springs are over here. So these two guys, these are the rear springs. Those are the front springs. So we'll put these guys on. And then, let's see, we'll put the springs on. The new shackles on. Bolt that all together. Put the new U-bolts on. Get that all squared away. Oh, and we have a rear sway bar here. So this is something the vehicle didn't come with, was a rear sway bar. And I know people are like, oh, it's a leaf spring vehicle. You don't need, sway bars or track bars. But hey, man, these are really nice for towing. It prevents the rear of your vehicle from doing this kind of motion, side to side. And having towed my Jeep with a rear sway bar and without a rear sway bar, I will say rear sway bar for the win. So that's going to be tomorrow. We might not get to that installed tomorrow, but we'll definitely get the springs in and this guy in tomorrow. Adios.